Welcome to our Client Success webinar series today. Super excited to be here today. My name is Dave Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Client Success. I'm so thrilled to have Julie with me today. Julie Fox, Global Director of Customer Success at Sin7. Julie, how you doing?
I am good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a great day. This is going to be a great webinar. Julie and I decided to link up to do this webinar after we shared a common interest around a really interesting topic around what we call team number one leadership. And we saw content that we were both sharing on LinkedIn. And so I reached out to Julie and said, Julie, I love this concept. It seems like you have a passion about it. We should do a webinar and talk about our own experiences around team number one leadership. So grateful you could join me today, Julie. Where are you coming in from, Julie?
I am Carmel, Indiana.
Carmel, Indiana. Great. And I'm coming in from Utah, Silicon Slopes. It's kind of cold today, but beautiful day today. And so let's jump right in. Let's talk about team number one leadership. And let's start out by just introducing it. Maybe I'll give a high level overview, and we have a few slides that we'll share today just as talking points. And again, we encourage you, if you have any questions, let us know. But the concept of team number one leadership really came from a book that our leadership team has really grasped onto. It's one called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. I know Julie's read it, and we share a lot of the same philosophies of aligning with the principles in this book. But it's really about a principle or a change in mindsets, talking about prioritizing the company or the organization's overall success over your own team or personal ambitions, and fostering this culture of alignment, trust, and accountability. And really kind of trying to change the mindset for leaders that they need to think about their initial leadership team, their peers and their executive team as their team number one, as the highest priority, and then their own individual and their own team as a second priority. I love this quote, and then Julie, I want to ask a quick question for you. But in Patrick's philosophy, he has this great quote, and this one really resonated with me. Says, when leaders compartmentalize and focus only on their own team, they create silos and dysfunction and ultimately a lack of alignment at the top. Being part of a leadership team requires sacrifice, putting aside personal interests and even departmental interests for the good of the whole. That really resonated to me because I don't know that I always, as a young leader especially, it didn't align to this. I was really focused on me and my leadership style. And Julie, I love this concept that you've shared, and maybe let's hear your thoughts on team number one leadership.
Yeah, so for me, I'm a very, very visual person. So when Dave and I were prepping for this and we're kind of thinking through how to articulate this, I wanted to kind of come up with an image or provide that for you guys of kind of what it looks like maybe today in your organizations or what you've seen in throughout your career versus kind of this shift, this paradigm shift of what kind of what we're talking about today. So if you think about many organizations, a lot of them are set up in a way where you have a CEO, but then you also have different functional directors, VPs, leaders for the different departments. So you have product, you have sales, you have marketing, you have CS, you have all of these different things. And some of those may look a little bit different. So maybe at one org, CS includes support and onboarding, and other orgs, those are separate or whatever. But where I've seen a lot of friction is this whole idea that you're kind of living in your own team. So as a leader, especially if you're a department head or even if you're in the middle management or something, when you think of your team, when you think of where you're prioritizing your time, it makes sense that you're going to spend most of your time with your team, and you think of it as your team is the function that you are under. And of course that makes sense, because if you think about it, it's like the reason we're in these careers is because we have a passion, we have an energy and excitement or experiences that have led us to this department or career that we're in, most likely, especially as leaders. And so it makes sense that you're going to, spend your time and energy where your passion is. Similarly, when it comes to your team, you have spent a lot of time to build and develop and coach a team and provide the career pathing, the OKRs, the targets, everything, it makes sense that your focus is going to be on your team. And so when somebody asks you, or when you think about who your team is, you're going to think, my team is customer success. Now, what I want to urge you guys to think through is kind of what that can mean, what the consequences of that could be. So, in my own experiences, similar to Dave, that's how I was a leader. And I actually really prided myself in the fact that like I was so passionate, so obsessive, and so diligent about my team and their development. And I would constantly go to battle for them. And that's literally what it felt like, where I'm going to other teams and I'm fiery and I'm frustrated because it's like, hey, I need more budget, I need more headcount. Hey, I'm going to sales and maybe there were misaligned expectations that put us into an odd position, or maybe there's some issue with product or engineering or support or whatever it is. But it constantly felt like I was working with these leaders and I was kind of butting heads with them in order to fight for on behalf of my team. And I felt like I would kind of go into this mama bear mode where it's like,
Exactly.
I'm protecting and taking care of my team. But while that all sounds fine in concept, what I actually found was that it led to a lot of no's. It led to a lot of friction with these other leaders because I'm sharing my side of the story. I'm sharing my side of how it impacts my team or our customers. And it felt very me in terms of my targets, or, our how we're spending our time or whatever. So now, post reading this book, post kind of experiencing it at a few different organizations, I've had just a complete shift in how I think through my team. So where I now today, and I'll tell a little bit of the story of how I've gotten here because it definitely wasn't overnight. It's not an easy shift.
Yeah.
But now when I think about my team, I think of it in terms of this visual on the right, where I am aligning most closely with the other leaders of the different departments. So I lead customer success at Sin7. I work extremely closely and have one-on-ones with people from sales and product and marketing, and I'm working really, really closely with them on where we're at, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and really kind of having the language and discussions around where are we going as a company? What are the results that we need to achieve? And sometimes, sure, there's absolutely friction. If anything, there's a little bit more conflict than what I probably had previously, but it does feel entirely different. So for me, um, one quick story that I've kind of like an example of how I've gotten there. At a past organization, I went into one of my first QBRs internally. So oftentimes different functions of the business have an internal QBR where you're meeting with your leadership and the CEO or things like that. So for me, it was a CEO and a chief revenue officer and our VP of sales. And so we go into this meeting and the salesperson goes first and they're talking through, hey, we're missing here. Hey, we're missing here. Hey, we're going to miss here. We need to change our targets. And we're thinking through, and I mean, this was a few years ago, but if you think through kind of the shift in economy, the shift in all of these different things, they were thinking through, hey, as a business, sales is not going to hit our goals. And here's how it's going to impact us as a business. And so they did everything right. And as they're talking, I completely kind of quickly am changing up what I'm going to share in my presentation because I realized that everything that I was about to share wasn't the most important information. Everything I was going to share was about the metrics of our business, or not of our business, of our department, and how we measured success and what we needed and all of that. And again, it was kind of, oh gosh, I'm getting into this habit of the me kind of mentality,
Yeah.
or my function mentality. And so instead, I talked to them and said, hey, I'm prepared to talk through all of this stuff. But before we do that, I want to comment on and I want to talk through how customer success, how we can help. It sounds like there's a gap here. Here's where we can fill this gap. And we talked through the exact number of, hey, here's how many customers we can save per month or per quarter. Here's the exact amount in upsell that we can achieve that will help us to fill this gap that is created right now for our company. And the reaction that I received was the CEO leaning across the table and saying, what do you need?
Yeah.
How can I help you get there? That's exactly what we need. And while, yes, we're going to address and work through what we can do on the new business pre-sale side, we also need more of this. What headcount do you need? What resources do you need?
Exactly.
And it was just a totally different conversation. Whereas had I gone into that conversation and said, here's how we're doing, here's what more we need, and I just don't know if it would have been
Yeah.
met with the same energy of them saying, how can we help? And kind of that we're all in this together mentality versus just thinking through it from a, hey, we have a limited amount of budget. Where should we allocate resources and what's the right place?
Yeah, your content originally wasn't bad content. It was good content, I'm sure, but it was just in context of you and your team, and thinking outside that context to the greater whole. You were actually able. Sounds like you were able to get more support than maybe you would have otherwise
Mhm.
if you had done the original presentation. That's cool. Did you have a mentor of yours that was particular helpful to, or was this your own journey, or did you have a mentor who pointed this out to you at all?
So at a previous company, I actually remember my chief customer officer and my director at the time. So this was when I was a manager
Uh huh.
of, I managed two different CS teams of CSMs, and my director and my CCO, they both had read this book. And I remember my director actually talking to me about it, and I hadn't read it at the time. And she was trying to explain this whole thing to me, and I actually was kind of offended because the way in my mind, the way that all that I was hearing was that I was not her number one team.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought
That's
of
what that's
this
the
for myself, and I'm
fear.
like, "What do you mean I'm not your number one team? I'm doing all this." Like, it made me feel like, "Am
Yeah,
I not significant? Am I not as important to you?" But what I actually saw in action, and I had a very good relationship with this director, and so being able to have that conversation and say, "Well, help me understand this."
yeah,
The more that she explained it, the more that I actually saw it in action over the coming weeks and months and quarters, it was such a shift for the business, and it impacted the CS team, my team, in such a beautiful way because I was able to see how we were reducing friction across the business, how we were working more cohesively together, and
yeah.
how that impacted not just our teams, but also like the customer experience, how our customers were working with us. And so seeing it in action, that was kind of my first, I guess, taste of that. And then for me, then it's been obviously I read the book, yes, but I think it's been this like not this necessarily easy journey if I do this 100% of the time. It's been a little bit of like an up and down of sometimes I don't do it, sometimes I do it. When I haven't done it, I am getting frustrated. I am feeling blocked, and I've started to feel and understand that difference. And when I do lean into it and take that different approach, because again, this wasn't overnight for me, it really was a long time and a journey, and it's a journey I'm still on. I feel like that's what I've kind of stepped back and noticed is I am able to get better fulfillment and satisfaction and feel like I'm having a bigger impact on this core function that I lead
Yeah.
of customer success when I show up in this way as a leader and when I also am able to not only embrace it but to get the other leaders around me doing the same thing.
That's great. So, Julie, just for those out there, I want to break down a little bit and make it clear. I know we read some of the stuff about team number one, but to make it very concrete, like let's talk about who team number one is. If you're a say you're a VP of customer success, who's the team number one? Let's be clear on that because this might be a
Okay.
new concept for some. Um, and so, let's you and I break that down. So, team number one for if you're a VP of customer success, team number one would be your peers in the executive team. Is that right?
That's right. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking the head of product, the
Yeah.
head of sales, the head of marketing, all of these different functions
Yeah.
that these other leaders across the business, I'm looking at it in that way versus necessarily thinking of my team number one as being the team that reports up to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree. So, if I'm on an executive leadership team, I would consider team number one as the ETL, the executives, my executive peers, and the
That's right.
CEO in that team. If you have another layer and you're VP of customer success and you have a lot of VPs at that same layer, that would be your team number one. Team number two then would be your own team. And so as we go through the webinar today, everybody, kind of put it in context. Team number one is the team that of your peers whichever layer you're at, and then team number two is your direct team, and there. I had my own journey on this to try to learn this. I'll show a quick slide, and we'll go off slides, but I call this my myopic mistake, and so I was very similar to you, Julie. I When I was a young professional, I would or leader, I always was like being the hero for my team, right? And just like you, your story sounds so familiar. Advocating for headcount, sticking up for concerns and challenges and everything, pounding the table for my team members. I remember one time when they asked us to make some really tough decisions on our team around budget and headcount, and I basically and part of it was budget cuts. And I basically came back to the team and I said, "Nope, sorry, we're not going to do cuts. We don't, And I remember, and it was like, wait a minute, you're not understanding the bigger picture here, Dave. It's not about you and your team necessarily. It's about all of us, and we need to do that." I had a mentor early as a young leader. His name was Steve Wellen. Really seasoned leader over time, had been at Siebel and Salesforce or IBM and some other things. Very seasoned sales leader who became our customer leader, and just I treasure him. And one day he pulled me aside as a young leader and said, "Dave, if you want to be a strong leader, you need to start thinking about outside of your team. You need to be understanding the vision of the entire company at a greater detail. You need to understand the metrics that the CFO understands. You need to understand what your product peers and your other peers at your level are doing, and you need to sacrifice some for the benefit of the whole." And so the reason why I call this my myopic mistake is that this, if you see this slide, this is kind of my view for a while as a leader, this very narrow view. And what Steve helped me do is like say, take a bigger look at the business. Be a much more mature leader, think bigger, and understand how you fit into the whole and how you contribute to the whole. And sometimes your contribution is to sacrifice or to not stick up for your team, to be accountable for things. Sometimes your contribution is to roll up your sleeves and help a peer. And all the time your contribution is to align with a bigger vision and make sure that you're aligned with us, and then help your team aligned with the bigger vision. So that was my myopic mistake, but like a really good lesson that I learned. And so when I read this team number one concept that Patrick Lencioni gave, that's what resonated, and I loved how he articulated it in that regard. So
Yeah, and I think it's feedback that we get, especially when we are younger or new leaders.
yeah,
Very seldomly do first-time managers or directors, even VPs, do you get like you don't get like a training on, hey, here's how to do this. Here's how to be a frontline manager. Here's how to
yeah,
be a VP. You oftentimes you're growing into these roles and you're taking on more things. And I think it can feel a little bit conflicting because I think when you are that frontline manager, or especially if you've grown from being an individual contributor, a high performer, into leadership, and then you kind of grow in that journey,
yeah,
it's hard because I think it's like you are very focused on your world and what you are controlling and your results. And then as a manager, you're very focused on your team's results and all of these different things. But I do think that it's really, really important to get that type of feedback and or to give that feedback also to other leaders is to open up your eyes a little bit to not just your own team and your world, but to have that bigger picture. And for
yeah,
me, some of what I've seen from that has been really cool is like because I work so closely, for example, with our sales leader, I understand our sales process pretty well, similar to onboarding process or some of these different things. When I have heard things from my team historically where they're saying, hey, we're having an issue with this, it allows me to have a little bit more empathy and understanding because I understand those teams and what we're all trying to achieve, to be able to not just say, hey, yeah, I'll go talk to this leader and, how dare they do these things or whatever. But it actually kind of gives me a different mindset around, hey, there's certain things that we are going to change. There are certain things that, we aren't or whatever, but let's work together to make sure that we're keeping the customer at the center of it, as well as the company and the results at the center of it, of what are we trying to achieve. And we're not against
yeah.
these other leaders. We actually need to work with them in order to achieve it. But I'm kind of curious. You mentioned you teased a little bit that you've had that sometimes there's things that you have to give up as a leader, and that
Yeah.
sometimes it's sometimes there's struggles with that and stuff. Do you have any examples of kind of what that has looked like as you have leaned into this philosophy or mindset?
Yeah, I think the one example that I would have around this was around annual planning and where the expenses, cutting expenses, and even unfortunately in this situation, it was cutting headcount. And this is where like you talked about Mama Bear. This is like Papa Bear. I shouldn't. I don't need to reduce headcount. All of my team is high performers,
Mhm.
but it was when somebody took me aside afterwards and said, Dave, I know you were advocating for your team, but by you not doing this, somebody else had to give up more headcount than they wanted. And
Mm,
um, and that may be a negative situation where we did it, but it was important for the entire company to be aligned in that regard. I think there's been some of those situations where I've done that as far as advocating for a customer issue per se,
mhm.
where I was like, the customer's always right, the customer's always right, the customer's always right, and that's usually my philosophy. I always take that approach. But in some of those situations, it was like, Dave, take a step back. Let's look at what the customer's asking for and the impact, the ripple effect on the
Yeah,
business, and understand that in some cases we can't always, the customer may be right, but we may not be able to deliver. Or maybe in
sure.
some situations the customer isn't right. What they are asking for is not what they need or the way that we can deliver it. And so those are a couple examples that I've seen in my career.
Love that.
Julie, I was going to ask you a question. So and we'll go to this screen, but as we do so, how do you this concept that you mentioned to say when you were when your leader, I believe, described the team number one concept, and you were like, wait, I thought I'm not team number one. So if you are a leader right now, I'd ask you the question: if you're on the webinar, do you understand the concept of team number one, and are you aligned to team number one? That's a question to ask yourself today. Do you have great alignment? Then the second question, and maybe Julie, some advice is then how do you articulate this to your team? And if they were to kind of say, well, if my boss's peers is team number one, how do how do you get them over this concept to say, wait, we're team number two? Does that mean we're second fiddle? Does that mean we're not gonna that my boss isn't gonna
It's a
advocate
good
for me?
question.
How would you
Yeah,
what advice would you give to the leaders on the webinar today that says, now how do you articulate this with your team who's looking
yeah,
to you and think that they're team number one?
yeah. So I think it's a little bit harder when you are like if you are on this call and you recognize, shoot, I'm not aligned to this team number one concept, and you're trying to make a change. Sure, that's going to be a little bit of a different hurdle because what you need to do, you're going to have to change expectations and kind of manage that with your current team and the way, and like they're going to see and feel the shift, and you should probably explain it. It is easier when you're coming into a new team to start from the beginning. And so I've experienced both of those where I've tried to make a shift while I was already a leader and realized, hey, I'm not doing this right. For that, a lot of it is being able to show them how show and articulate to them how this is going to impact them. I think everybody is naturally a little bit selfish in the sense that like any change, we want to think about how is that going to impact me as a human, as a person, not just, my role or our team.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to help them understand how it will impact them, to say, hey, the way we're currently doing it is leading to friction or denial. And because we are so focused on how we are measuring success and what it means for our specific roles and team, I don't feel like we're doing a good enough job to be able to achieve the results that we need, one as a business,
Yeah.
but two as a team. I feel like we're hitting some walls here, and I want to help us to overcome that. So being able to talk through with them, and I think that's a little bit also in my style of leadership. I lead with a certain amount of vulnerability and being candid. And hey, if I'm doing something that is not getting us to the intended results that we're trying to get to as a team or as a company, I would rather own that and put my hand in the air and say, like, hey, I want to be vulnerable here and share. I've noticed something. I've noticed that when I'm doing this, this, and this, it's not getting us to the results that we're trying to achieve. I recognize this and I'm committed to making a change. Here's how I am going to show up. Here's how I'm going to change this by me being able to invest my time and energy into the business goals and results, being able to speak the language of the business and explain that to them. It's not that I'm calling out and saying, you're not my priority. It's saying, because you and this function is so important to me, the best way for me to achieve that what we are trying to achieve is
Yeah.
for me to make this shift. And so I
Yeah.
think being able to articulate in that way, um, that's my advice. Again, I
Yeah.
think if there's something that you as a leader are going to make a change and it's going to be noticeable, you should probably let people know why you're making that change and what to expect. But that also can allow people then provide you feedback or feel a little bit more comfortable coming to you if they're like, hey, we've made this shift. And what that actually has meant, maybe that means that you're not attending as many meetings and you're not as involved in the day to day of things. If that is creating more problems, I need to know that. I need to know. And so it's like that's where you've got to get the buy-in from your team on this stuff to say, hey, if this shift and what we're doing, if it's not working at any point, you now know what we're trying to achieve. So you can come to me if it's not working and let me know, because I need to know that. So that's
Yeah.
one thing. And then, like I said, I've also experienced coming into a team and being able to establish myself as that type of a leader from the very beginning. So what that means is if I'm coming in as a head of customer success, I'm immediately investing in and building those relationships with those cross-functional leaders. I'm immediately setting up my calendar in a way and my learning and education in a way that I'm getting to know the overall customer experience and journey that a customer goes through and learning more about the ins and outs of our product and engineering cycles and processes and all of that stuff. But that to me has been a little bit easier historically because I'm able to do that and pretty quickly show my managers or my team, my customer success team, I'm able to come in and maybe get them a little bit faster traction and results than what they had received previously.
Yeah.
So I think what that does is it shows them, and then at any point, if it does become a conversation, I'm happy to have that conversation, but I'm also happy to say, hey, here's why we've been able to have this success is because of this focus that I have on our overall business results. And here's how what this would mean for you as an individual contributor or as a manager or director or something like that.
That's great. Well, I want to. You've talked a lot about like aligning with your peers, and I want to jump to a slide to kind of talk about this. The slide that I'm showing now, we talk about you've got to have this company wide perspective, which we've shared, collective accountability and unified alignment. So let me jump to a slide to just kind of get into the details of it. Um, Team number one alignment, again, assuming you're a customer success leader, head of customer success, VP of customer success. The key alignment at that level are with your sales counterparts, your product counterparts, support counterparts, finance, marketing, and ultimately you've got to be aligned up to the executive leadership team. If unless you're a part of it, right? Obviously
Mhm.
you'd be aligned there. Um, Maybe let's talk a little bit specifically about examples of what you should do. What are some best practices around aligning with each of these functional groups? So if you start at sales, Julie, what are your thoughts of like how should you as a customer success leader be aligned with your sales counterparts? What are some things that you should consider or best practices to consider on the sales side?
Yeah. So I like to think of this in terms of, and sometimes this is an education that I need to have with other core leaders, but I, as a CS leader, continually have the lens around the customer experience. And I think that's kind of a little bit of my duty is to do that of, hey, how does this feel for a customer? So when I think through, if you imagine, I'm sure many of you guys have gone through customer journey mapping experiences or exercises.
Yeah.
What this may look like is working with those cross-functional leaders to not just set up like a one-on-one here and there of, hey, let's meet, let's talk through, or, educate me about the sales process, or share some demos with me so I can see the sales team in action or see some of this stuff. But I think it's more so of like, let's map this out together. Let's understand the current customer journey, starting with the sales process, because in my, by definition, customer experience, and I don't know if this is by definition or maybe this is the Julie definition,
Yeah.
but when I think of customer experience, it is the layering of all the experiences that a customer goes through before they become a customer, while they're a customer, even after they're a customer. But it's everything from marketing ads or LinkedIn content. It's everything from their sales experience, onboarding experience, support experience,
Yeah.
academy or education experience,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And it's the layering of those, the good, the bad, all of it. And so being able to better understand what that sales process and journey looks like with the customer lens, kind of mindset, helps me to then think through both internally, what are the things that we need to do? If we're gathering certain amount of information that would be helpful for onboarding, would be helpful for a CSM, I want to make sure that we have a way that our systems are talking so that we have visibility into that information. When there is risk in the sales process, we need to know. That's okay. I'm not saying don't sell that customer. I'm actually saying go through it, but let's be super candid and transparent around either where there's risk or where there's opportunity so that we can create a more cohesive customer experience for the customer, which will lead to not just, easier internal conversations, but actually to better retention. And so I think again, that's where when I think in the with the business in mind of the results that we're trying to achieve, when it comes to lifetime value and cost to acquire customers, it is a disservice to the company to lose customers before we are making before we even
Yeah.
make.
I
And so I think
agree.
it's like when you think of it that way, it's really, really important that we get this right so that we can have long-term retention and growth with our customers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think on the sales side, a couple thoughts, and one you mentioned was one is helping provide input into the ICP. Our CCO Christy Faltroso wrote a post today about that. As like as CS leaders, how can you collaborate with your sales and marketing peers to help them know from actual customer experience and results and outcomes who are the best customers to sell to? So
Mhm.
that's one there that I think is really critical from aligning with your sales counterparts is to be in agreement on who the ICP is and collaborate on that so you're selling to the right customers. Another one that I also think that we as customer success leaders sometimes overlook and sales leaders is aligning comp plans. Um,
Mm.
that sounds kind of like why do you need to focus on comp plans? But one example that I had in back in when I was with Adobe is that we had a CSM who ran one of our largest customers globally. I think it was Vodafone, and just worked so hard all year long to make sure that Vodafone was in a good spot. And then you had the sales rep come in at the end to run the renewal, and it was a big expansion. And the sales rep went away with this massive commission, and the CSM got a little. And I remember there was this example that the CSM said is like, Dave, how did this work? The account executive basically could buy a yacht, and I'm stuck with a small rowboat,
Mm.
and so I found that like over the years, that's one that's overlooked is like making sure that you understand and build comp plans. If there are variable comps on the CS side, make sure that they are aligned in a way to drive collaboration between the teams,
Mhm.
um, uh, not
And I've seen
friction.
that on the sales side too, where some teams create a window, for example, where it's like,
Yeah,
hey, if this customer, especially like if this, and I know every team is structured differently, but in the case of the CS team
yeah,
owning upsell and in that expansion, there is a window of time where the sales team is also benefited if the customer grows within the
yeah.
first year. or 90 days or 6 months or whatever it is. But what that does is it allows for more sales members to actually close. And not that I'm trying to, this is going to be controversial, not that I'm trying to advocate for
Yeah.
shorter or smaller deals,
Yep.
but being able to come in at the right price and the right functionality can allow not only for a quicker sales cycle, because now instead of you trying to sell them the entire house, you're trying to sell them a room of the house or something, but
Yeah.
it's like it can allow you to focus on what's important to them right then and create that growth built in of, hey, I may still share with you kind of how you're going to grow with us and what this would look like and everything, but allows them to close deals faster. It also allows those teams to collaborate because the AE has a little bit more skin in the game. They're saying, hey, I teed this up. I know they're interested in these two other things, but I want them to be able to go live and be successful in their core thing that's most important to them because they have really tight deadlines or whatever the case is. But it's like you can do what's right and best for the customer and then work closely with the CS team to make sure that we are helping to guide them in that journey. And I think I've seen some really cool things with that. I've also seen times where these things can backfire, where the sales team is comped in a way where there's clawbacks and things like that. And so they get really sensitive to a customer that churns or issues like that. And it's like, on one hand, I've seen really positive things come out of that because great, I want them to care.
Yeah.
But also that can turn into a little bit of finger pointing of, well, I did my job. Why aren't you doing your job? Or why aren't you
Exactly.
raising these things? And so I just want to call out that some of those things, it's not a perfect science, but I do think that how compensation is created across these teams is very important because that drives a lot of those behaviors and prioritization across the teams.
Yeah, agreed. I want to address a couple things that also Allison on the chat said that when you think of comp plans, they don't need to be equitable, but excuse me, identical but equitable. Like they should
Mm.
recognize both and do that. And I agree. Um, and then Joe Sharon asked why the people team isn't considered a team number one peer for comp plans, and I would say it should be. My point was just to articulate different ways in which we should really have great alignment with our peers in the sales team around ICP, around comp plans, around roles and responsibility. One of the biggest challenges I've seen over the years is that there's could be a natural friction between sales and CS for whatever reason, and it really starts at the top. And so, really engaging with your team number one peer in the sales team and being on the same page and having an alignment is really important. Now, also in the chat, Abigail, and Bonnie mentioned that if in the order, like that, it should be important that we are aligned with our product peers. So
Mhm.
let's switch to product, Julie. I agree, since our customers are the mainly ones who are using the product, giving feedback on the product. Julie, how should we engage with our team number one peers in the product side of the house? Any
Yeah.
suggestions there?
Um, I promise I will answer this, but
Yes.
I do want to take a little bit of a step back just because I want to make sure that we're articulating this, that it's not to say if somebody is not on this slide, for example, it's not to say
Correct.
that the people leaders or finance or some of these are not important. It's just these were the ones that we selected. And you're going to go through
Great to point out.
each company is going to be structured a little bit differently to where you may find that based on the needs of the business, you're going to go through phases or seasons where you are working really, really closely. Like for example, I'm right now working on really building out our like a more strategic upsell strategy.
Yeah.
And with that, I've got to work really, really closely with marketing and product. It's not to say that I'm not also working closely with a lot of the others, but in this season, that's how I can show up best in order for us to achieve the business goals that we have around growth of our customers. And so it's more so to say like you need to your entire team, when you think of that team number one, is all of the functions of the business. There's nobody that should be left out of it. Product, engineering, finance, all of these are all included, but you may, depending on what function you own, you may have periods or different seasons and stuff where where you're spending a little bit more time because in order for you to achieve those business results, that is what is required. So I wanted to touch
Well
on that.
said. Very well said. Yeah, this image could be a broader star. This is just an example of some that are often important
Yeah. Okay,
pillars
so
that we need.
product.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many ways. So I am going to go a little bit high level here, and I'll also give some granular kind of examples. But in order to achieve the results of the business, it's really important that you're building the right product for the right people and that you are communicating both feedback. So you need to, you are as a CS leader, or even like as a support leader, things like that, the people that interact most with the customers, it is our responsibility to be very involved in where the product is and where the product is going. Because we need to make sure that we are sharing adequately the data, both qualitative and quantitative, that we are getting from support tickets, that we are getting from QBRs with our biggest customers, the feedback that we are gathering. It's not just enough to log it and to say, okay, pass it on to this team and I hope that they're prioritizing the things. But CS needs to be able to have actual discussion with product leaders to be bought into where we are going and kind of how we can contribute to all of that. So I think that's one part of it. And also as you are launching new products or going through mergers or acquisitions, things like that, having a CS leader in those discussions is really, really important because it's not just, hey, is this thing sellable? Like you think about the growth at all cost models of where teams were super focused on building products that are sellable, not necessarily valuable, not necessarily
True.
sustainable, but something that
Yeah.
they could sell. That doesn't work really well in especially in a SaaS business where you are reliant on reoccurring revenue. It's imperative that you are building and improving and enhancing products that are valuable and that are meeting needs, and that you are a part of those discussions to how are we going to launch these? How are we going to roll these out? Not just how are we going to sell it and is it marketable, but once we do, what does that journey look like for the customer from a scaled perspective of, maybe more self-service or automated content and stuff like that, but also when things need to be escalated or one-to-one touches and stuff like that, how are you set up from the beginning to be able to achieve the goals of this? And so I think there's a lot of broad ways that you can work together. And then there's also very, very granular things around kind of team enablement. I think I really lean heavily on my product leadership to say, hey, we have some gaps here. For example, I had an account manager that came to me the other day and said, hey, I went through all of these trainings to prepare for something. I don't feel ready. I feel I need a little bit more. I don't know how to build out a demo site. I wouldn't feel comfortable getting on a call with a customer. I actually went straight to our uh, VP of product and said, "Hey, there's a gap here. Let's talk through this because obviously we need to we need to be able to sell this thing. But if that's a gap that I'm getting from one of our top performers on in the entire company, that gap probably exists there for other employees that maybe haven't shared something. And so it's like wanting to work through that. And then also thinking of it again with that customer centricity or customer lens of if a customer buys this thing and we just consumed all the materials to get up to speed and we say, I'm not there yet, we probably need to invest in also what the self-service resources and everything looks like from the customer lens, because if it's too complex for us, it's going to be way too complex for the customer to be able
Yeah.
to do this and do it well.
Yeah, no, I love all you said. From my experience, I have a like scars from early experience with my product peers to success on the other end. And when I was a young, actually, I've been in all levels of customer success, from frontline CSM to executive to a CEO of a company who sells a product. But when I was a young CSM, for strategic accounts for this. I remember going into the product leader and engineer. He ran product and engineering and had a specific, like really important need that I had for our customer, and basically was told, don't bother me. We already have a roadmap. Like if you have a problem, like go through. And I just remember sitting in there just feeling so demoralized.
Yeah.
Like this is so important. Like at least hear me out, right?
And you just
And
want to shake them a little bit, be like, what do
exactly.
you mean?
Like, well, what happened? I don't know if I ever got through with that executive, but his team I worked with over time, and really, what really got the breakthrough was where I ended up taking some of his leaders with me to customers to hear firsthand, like
Yeah.
actual on-site visits. Now I know on-site visits are not as prevalent as they used to be, but I remember having one of his leaders come with us to go visit CNN, who was a customer of ours. We were doing a key product for them, and when she was in the room and she was able to listen firsthand to the customer, understand the customer's perspective, and hear the pain points and the opportunity, all of a sudden the light started clicking on. And so we started doing that with all the product leaders, bringing them on site, bringing them on calls, and that alignment started to really become a reality. Not
And
only
it,
that is that the investment in the relationship of traveling
yeah.
and being on calls together, being in the trenches together, started having that alignment. And it changed the whole dynamics of the business once we started doing that. So
I love that. And honestly, I think technology has made it easier
yeah,
because it's not necessarily that you need to today get the
yeah,
budget, get everything to be able to do all these on-site visits. You now can even after the fact, even if they weren't live on that call, which obviously is always going to be the preference. I think that there's a difference when you are on the call and you
yeah,
are the one listening to it directly from the customer and are given the opportunity to speak directly with the customer. That's always going to be best case scenario. Best case scenario is in person.
yeah,
Second, I guess, is that kind of I'm on the call live with the customer. But there's also a lot of opportunity today. Most calls are recorded. We have incredible technologies and different things that allow us to be able to capture the voice of the customer without us having to transcribe it with text, but actually being able to say, hey, let me share this snippet with you, or hey, let me, like, whatever it is that they can hear it directly from the customer.
yeah. No, I agree. I think that if we look at this and just looking at time, we may not be able to go through every department ahead, but I
Mhm.
think the message to our friends on the webinar today is that the importance of investing the time with your peers on team number one to establish that alignment in that relationship. And really, some advice I would give is like seek to understand. I love Frank Covey's from Seven Habits. Seek to understand, then be understood. Understand their perspective, understand their world, their challenges, and then your peers will be more likely to listen to your needs. And then invest it just like you would invest in building a relationship with a customer. Take your peers to lunch. Schedule one-on-ones on a regular basis to have that open conversations, and really take the time, and the benefits of doing that would be really beneficial over time. So, anything to add before we move on?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, and I know we're going, and you can move on to the next slide, but I think as we're talking through some of this stuff, I think it's really important to know that like it's again, it's this leadership layer is incredibly important, but you also need to get the whole company
Yeah,
thinking in this way. It's not enough for a singular leader to do this, but it's a shift as a business. And so, one thing that I wanted to share, and I'm early in this journey with Sin7, so I can't necessarily say here's the exact results that were achieved as because of this initiative or because of this mindset shift. But early on, I had a lot of conversations with my CEO where we were talking through kind of what's going well in the business, where there's opportunities for improvement. And things kept coming back to customer centricity and customer experience. And he knew it, I knew it. It wasn't even that I necessarily had to convince him of this, that this was the right thing for the business. But his concern was that he was like, every CEO says that the most important thing is the customer and that we need to be customer centric or customer first or whatnot.
yeah,
And so it was really important to him of, hey, how if we're gonna do this, I want to do it really well. How can we do it? And it won't just become a poster on the wall from a theme that we did a while ago, but actually a shift that we made in the business where we can think, here was the business before the shift, here it was after. And so one thing that we've done at Sin 7 is we've created this talk track in this shift. And like for us, it was a customer centricity theme. The theme that we chose was own the outcome, every team, every touch point, because we really wanted to create that mentality around ownership, how it impacts the customer experience, all of that. But what I've done is thought of this more as like built out a business case for it, built out kind of the project plan of how am I going to share this with the entire employees or company, but also what will we do to ensure success here? And so what we've done is for the month of January, I've been meeting with every single department, all of them, all of these leaders, and we've been going piece by piece to have very dedicated conversations with product, with sales, with people and culture, with all of these different teams to understand, hey, here's the shift we're making as a business. How is your team? How are we going to contribute to this and coming up with actual initiatives and milestones and how we're going to measure it and being able to not just come up with those plans, but come up with what are the next steps? What are the milestones in Q1? How are we going to iterate in Q2 and all of that and kind of building out that journey and project plan for this. It's been really, really cool.
That's so
I've
cool.
loved it. I feel like
Yeah.
it's like one of the coolest things I've done in my career because it's given me this opportunity to have other leaders also say, I don't know. You tell me, what do you think we should be doing? And it's like what a dream. I have so many ideas. Let's talk through this. Let's collaborate. But it's just been really cool to see how this ripple effect with working together as leaders, the impact that it's had, not just on the customer experience, but oh my gosh, on the employee experience. I have so many employees from different teams, and I'm seeing and they're highlighting and we're sharing the wins and the wins of our customers more. But you're seeing almost this impact that it's having on engagement as a whole, because we're seeing employees now they kind of feel like, hey, I'm part of something bigger than myself. I'm part of something bigger than just my role or my function. And I think that's where a lot of teams are seeing immense fulfillment beyond just the business results, which obviously we were hoping for impact on the customer experience, of course, and
Yeah.
impact on the business results. But I think that's been kind of the cherry on top is the impact that it's had on the employee experience.
That's so great. I just think that what you're doing there in your journey is just a great example of like what others should do. Engage with your peers, have invest that time, drive alignment across your organization, and then bring your team along for the journey as well. So cool. One last question. I know we're out of time, but we had one who said, what if you have a peer that's not buying into this vision of alignment and engagement? Any quick thoughts, final thoughts about how would you engage with a peer who's not buying into it?
Absolutely. I think the best thing that you can do is, again, speak the language of the business, but also seek to understand
Yeah,
what is their team, is their team measured, and what does that look like? Because then when you do approach these different topics, if you need to, speak their language. Like
yeah,
if say you're working with support, for example, say your CS team doesn't own support and you're working with a support leader and they're saying, hey, we can't do these things because like they're just hyper focused on their time to answer things and all of these different metrics and stuff. And they think that some of this type stuff might be a distraction. Then get into it, get into the weeds around how they are measured and what that means and how you can work together. And I think for me, at least, that's really helped a lot is to help them to really understand that and see it.
that's great. That's great. Great advice. I agree. Just invest the time.
Mhm.
And sometimes give the philosophy of give to get. Sometimes you've got to give and understand and invest in them, and then they'll invest back to you. So, great advice, Julie. Julie, it's been such a pleasure. I love the shared passion around this concept, the shared learnings that we've had in different our own journeys throughout our careers, and all the advice and recommendations you gave today is so impactful. So, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for being here today. We are, if we can be of help in any way, please let us know. Again, the team at Client Success is here to help your needs. for anything from helping drive your customer success strategy. And our platform is built just for that. So if we can help in any way, reach out. We're again grateful for Julie to join us today as we talk about the team number one leadership. We encourage you to take one principle that you learned today, one idea, and implement it today, this week, and reach out to one of your peers, teach them the concept, or engage and invest the time to develop team number one leadership in your leadership style and in your company. Now, if you like this webinar, which I'm sure you've really enjoyed hearing from Julie, we encourage you to come next week. We've got another great leader who's joining me, Marley Wagner. Marley brings a great experience of marketing and customer success, and has really mirrored those two for digital customer success. And we're going to talk a little bit about how digital customer success is not tech touch. We always kind of bring those two together. But Marley's going to help break those out and help us understand that. So that's next week on Tuesday, not Wednesday, February 4th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, 1 p.m. Eastern. We hope you can enjoy us. We hope you join us for that webinar. And it's one that you will enjoy significantly. And so have a great week. Thanks for being here today. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.